So I was 15 years old at the time, and I was playing airsoft in a super deep thicket of woods behind my house with 3 other friends. It was right on the brink of dusk and had started to rain a fair amount. But we were super familiar with these woods, so we thought anyway, so we didn't pay much mind to the lack of daylight or rain. After splitting up into one of 2 groups, we agreed that one team or 2 would go into the thick of the woods, where we'd built numerous foxholes and trenches to defend, while the other team stuck to the less wooded area of the trail that worked its way through these woods. Well, I was on the latter team, so we started making our rounds up and down the trail to try and bring them out of the woods for a sort of better angle of engagement. I had actually brought night vision goggles. We took airsoft a bit seriously, and was ahead of my partner on the trail, surveying the area since we did know that some potentially aggressive wildlife did live out there, like coyotes and wild hogs and stuff like that. And well, after walking maybe 200 or 300 feet, I would say, into the woods, I noticed some really strange movement ahead of us on the trail, at maybe 400 feet past the trail entrance now. Whatever it was, too, it's big, like really big, at least 6 foot in stature. I immediately let my buddy know to hold tight so that I could study it a little more before it noticed us. But the weirdest thing about it all, I noticed that it was bipedal once it ran into the woods, right in the direction of our other team as well. Well, we hauled ass straight out of there. I mean, we ran like I've never run before, and I was a pudgy 15-year-old kid at the time. Once we finally got out of the field, clearing right before the trail entrance, we started scrambling for our radios and breath so that we can get to the other frequency and tell them to get the heck out of Dodge. Well, say no more, because minutes later, our other 2 buddies came rushing out of there with urgency that I didn't know that they even had. To say that their faces were as white as a ghost and that they were terrified wouldn't be doing it justice either. Once they finally were able to choke out a sentence, though, we were informed that not even minutes after my partner and I's encounter on the trail, that they had been in a foxhole maybe 300 to 400 feet away, listening and looking for us. Only, they had an encounter with our cryptid friend as well. And one of them had something, what I can only assume was this unknown creature, breathe down his neck as he sat faced away from it in the foxhole. He said that he didn't get to see it, but he could certainly feel just how big it was behind him. And not even seconds after he squeezes their experience out, we hear the most guttural, nerve-grating screech come from the woods that, to this day, I have not felt a fear remotely close to, as well as not even having a chance to identify it. We did go back to the woods the next day to see if we could find anything strange, and we did. Deer, and I mean lots and lots of just mangled deer after deer after deer, at least 5 of them in maybe a mile radius. That's what we could find anyway. We left after seeing that, and while we did keep playing airsoft at that same location, for many more months in fact, until I'd eventually moved from my childhood home, we never went back after dark past that day though. So, I just want to start by saying that, to make this story easier to understand, I'm going to use a lot of dialogue. Obviously, this wasn't recorded, so these aren't the exact words of anyone involved in this experience. But I'm just trying to tell it as best as possible, and I think it'll benefit me and you if I use a lot of quotes. Just keep in mind, though, that most of it is not direct. This is going to be a bit long too, so let's just get into it. So this happened in 2015 when I was 16 and still living in my hometown. A forgotten little beach town in the middle of nowhere that's so remote it's probably not even known by surrounding areas. Basically, there's 3 things that you can do there as a teenager though. Go to the movies, swim, or go to this pathetic little place called Miller's Fun Park. It's relatively similar to a lot of park-type things, only a whole lot worse if I'm being honest. There's a terrible arcade with broken skee-ball machines, batting cages that probably haven't been used since the early 80s, a pathetic mini golf course, and the most dangerous go-karts that you've probably ever seen in your life. Like, seriously. Miller's Fun Park is on the edge of a field, though. On the opposite side of the field, about 3 miles down, I would say, is the beach, and across the single street are the woods. Now, if our town is pretty much in the middle of nowhere, Miller's must practically be on the moon. So my cousin Emma and I decided one summer night that we wanted to go go-karting. It was around 10 p.m, so we knew it'd be almost deserted, but that was the way that we liked it anyway. So I picked her up from her house and we made the long drive down. Once we had arrived and parked in the nearly empty lot, we hopped out of the car and paid for some go-karting tickets. The same people had worked there forever, I swear to you as well. But there was no one except for a few boys in the arcade, and a guy who looked to be in his 60s, sitting on a bench near the batting cages. So Emma and I paid him no mind and we went back to the go-kart track. Like I said too, these karts were incredibly dangerous, so I was completely focused on nothing but making sure I wasn't going to skid and flip as we raced way too fast around the windy track. And I think that this is why I didn't notice the guy walking over to the fence, and also why I didn't notice him watching us until we pulled into the lanes after our last lap. He was standing on the other side of the fence right where I was parked. He stared at me with the most unsettling expression and a really creepy smile playing on his cracked lips as his dark eyes gleamed. I managed to sort of uneasy smile back, handed another ticket to the guy running the go-karts, who was obviously higher than a kite at that time, and Emma and I went off again. But this time I just couldn't focus, because this dude just gave me the worst type of feeling. My eyes were constantly finding their way to the metal fence where he stood, unmoving and watching us every time that we were in his view. And the thing that was bothering me the most was that he had only bought 3 tickets. We were on our second to last run, and he was standing directly next to the exit gate. I was honestly just praying that he would move before we were done. But of course, no such luck. Our last go came and went, and I had no choice but to pull in next to him, unbuckle my seatbelt, and get out of my go-kart. I glanced over at Emma a few feet away as I opened the exit gate to see if she was as scared as I was, but she didn't even seem to notice as she bounced over and bragged about how she had beat me the last 2 times. I was barely listening though, and I just sort of opened the gate, and the guy stopped in front of me just as I was leaving. "Hey there," he said. His voice was dry, and he smelled like cigarettes. "What are you cute girls doing all alone here?" My eyes darted over to Emma, who was looking at the dude with both confusion and annoyance. What?" she said, pushing past the gate so she stood beside me. "Well, it's so late." His tone was as hungry as his eyes, and he reminded me of a snake for some reason. "Do your parents know that you're out here?" "Yes," I answered quickly. "They're waiting for us, actually. We need to get going." This was a lie, and probably sounded like it from my tone, but I tried to push past him anyway. It didn't work. He grabbed my shoulder, actually, to keep me in front of him. "Nonsense. I saw you girls pull up alone." My heart dropped to my stomach. He had? "Are you heading out? Why don't I walk you guys to your car?" He starts inching towards me, and I look to Emma for help. With one swift movement, she pulled me halfway behind her and started sizing the guy up. This was pretty dumb, as we're both very small, and though she's a few inches taller than me, neither of us are anywhere near this guy's size. I mean, this guy was clearly 6'2" at least, but she doesn't seem to care. "Actually, we're just headed to the arcade," she says harshly. "Her boyfriend is going to meet us there." I did have a boyfriend at the time, but he wasn't coming. He wasn't even in town, in fact. I knew that she knew this as well. The guy's face immediately changes, though. His smile completely disappeared, and he was now glaring down at me with a look of annoyance in his eyes. I felt myself starting to cower. "Boyfriend?" he says roughly. Emma didn't give me time to say anything. She just grabbed my arm and tugged me behind her into the arcade. The boys from before had already left, unfortunately, and the usual girl who worked in there was nowhere to be found. Still, though, it felt safer than outside, so we ran to the back and hid behind the claw machine. what do we do? I left my phone in the car," I whisper shouted. There was no way that I was going out there alone at this stage, and the pothead go-kart guy had already disappeared into the small ticket shack as well. "I don't have mine either. I left it charging," she said, facepalming. "We're just gonna have to make a run for it, alright? Wait, are you crazy? He's probably waiting for us in the parking lot." "Well, what about the guy who runs the go-karts? We could get him to walk us out," she said, and I just shook my head. "Man, he's high as Mount Everest right now. I don't want to risk running all the way to the ticket stand for nothing." "Well, then we don't have any choice." She stood up, pulling me with her. "Let's go." I swallowed hard, wanting to cry. I had honestly never been that scared before up until that stage. And there was just something really wrong about this guy. We just knew it. We made our way out the arcade, looking around to see if he was nearby, but the park was now absolutely deserted. Emma practically had to drag me to the exit. I was looking every direction every second, waiting for this guy to come out of the woods or something and pounce on us at any second. But he didn't. In fact, everything was just sort of dead still. "Get your keys out," Emma instructed, and I pulled them out from my pocket. We were about 20 feet from my car when I stopped dead in my tracks. "What?" she whispered. I stared at the car, keys in hand, and I had never locked it. "Emma, I never locked the car." "What?" "I didn't lock it. And what if—" I trailed off, but she knew what I was saying. She started inching towards the car, and I grabbed her arm to stop her, but she pulled away. "I'm just going to peek, alright? If I say run, then you have to run." Her voice is quiet, but I nodded shakily. She eventually made it close enough to see inside, but by the way that she was squinting, I knew that it was way too dark to make anything out. My heart was beating out of my chest, and I mean, what if he wasn't there? What if he jumps out? Or what if we get in and he asphyxiates me like in the movies or something? All these thoughts almost drown out the unmistakable sound of shoes slamming against the pavement all of a sudden. My head whipped around instantly, and there he was, sprinting at us at full speed out of the woods. I screamed bloody murder and broke for the car, jiggling the handle as I realized that I had locked it, in fact. Emma was already on the other side, screaming at me to unlock it. I fumbled with the keys but managed not to drop them as I unlocked the door, flung it open and practically threw myself inside. I had just managed to close the door too when he was there, slamming his fist against the window and shouting incoherently. I was sobbing at this point and barely managed to lock the doors as he goes for the handle and yanks on it as hard as he can. Emma was screaming at me to go, 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 and through my tears I shoved the key into the ignition and just flew it into reverse. He was still chasing us as well and yelling at us as I veered backwards out of the lot and turned as fast as I could while slamming on the gas. Honestly too, I was driving like I was still in that go-kart, but I didn't care. I could barely see the road through the flood of tears, and Emma had to grab the wheel several times to keep us from crashing before I finally regained my composure. Though obviously shaken up, she managed to keep her tears in and be the sane one out of the two of us as we drove at least 30 miles over the speed limit the whole way back to my house. In the end, we didn't actually tell either of our parents about this as well, and looking back, I truly wish that we had, because there was something seriously wrong about that guy. But we were just sillily too scared of what they might say or do. I think that we may have thought at the time that they would blame us or something, so it just stayed a secret between us. Something that even we didn't talk about until months after the horrifying encounter. Safe to say, though, we never went back to Miller's Fun Park after that. And I guess I'll finish with this. I just want to urge you guys to all be extremely careful if you're going out at night, because you just truly never know who or what you may stumble upon. When I was around 12 years old, my family and I moved into a semi-detached house just up the street from our previous home. The house wasn't very big, and the floor plans for our part of the house were completely different from our neighbours. But our neighbours were a lovely little family of 4. Husband is from England, wife is from Norway, which is where I live. They also had a little 3-year-old girl and a 6-month-old boy. Now, I actually really like children, always have, and at the time I really wanted to start babysitting. It's quite common to start babysitting at about age 12 here, and I was turning 13 about a month later anyway, so I wanted to find a small job. As we got to know our neighbours over the first few months of living there, my parents told the neighbours that if they ever needed a sitter, then it would be nice if they would consider trying me out. Seeing as it would be my first job as a babysitter, we thought it would be smart to start with my next-door neighbours, seeing as my parents would literally be on the other side of the wall, just in case anything happened. Cut to a Friday night when my neighbours went to a party that was happening just down our street. I got there at around 8 p.m, and the parents told me that they would come home at around 2 or 3 a.m. Both kids were already sleeping, so they told me to just put on a movie and just relax. Now, these kids were honestly the easiest to babysit ever. Once you put them to bed and they fell asleep, literally, absolutely nothing would wake them up. They really were some of the heaviest sleepers that I've ever seen, so babysitting them was usually pretty uneventful. I was on the couch watching Avatar in the living room on the 2nd floor. The kids had their own separate bedroom that was just downstairs where the front door was. I could basically see their bedrooms from where I was sitting, as the place was quite small. But because of the hallway, I couldn't quite see the front door. Now, again, this house was very small, so as long as the TV wasn't up too loud, I could hear everything that happened downstairs. And at around midnight, I heard the front door unlock and my neighbours walked in whilst talking. I hear them close the door and they started taking off their jackets and shoes. I thought it was a bit weird that they hadn't called to let me know that they were coming home early. I just assumed that it must have slipped their minds though, so I went downstairs to greet them. I could hear them talking up until the point that I came around the corner to the hallway that led to the door, and when I did, there wasn't anybody there. The talking fell silent the second that I turned the corner, and the only sound was from the TV upstairs. My heart started beating quickly, and my head was rushing now. I ran to the bedrooms and checked the kids before I searched the rest of the house. I opened every door, checked every cabinet for anything that could explain what had just happened. But honestly, there was just nothing there. The kids were still sound asleep as well, and eventually I just convinced myself that I must have been imagining things. I did check the kids one last time, and I made sure that the doors were wide open so that I could see them from upstairs. Eventually, I sat down to finish the movie whilst trying to process what had just happened. But when I sat down, I noticed the TV had been shut off, even though I hadn't turned it off. And when I turned it back on, there was just snow on the screen. I couldn't for the life of me get it to work again as well. And that was when the talking downstairs started up again. But not only that, but the baby started screaming bloody murder. Now, this baby never woke up from naps, and definitely never screamed the way it did that night. I've never in my life run down a staircase as fast as I did that night, though. I rushed towards the baby's bedroom, only to find the door closed. I ripped the door open, picked up the baby, and rushed to pick up his sister. I took them both upstairs and held those kids for almost 3 hours before, finally, the parents came back home. The talking and the sounds downstairs came and went as I had the kids with me on the couch. I held them as close to me as I possibly could, and I just tried my best to keep them asleep. As the parents came home, I was too scared to walk downstairs to greet them. I couldn't be sure if it was actually them or not until they walked up the stairs and just found me clutching their children upstairs. Obviously, they noticed that I was upset and asked me what had happened. I honestly felt like I had lost my mind at that point, but I just told them the story anyway. After I was finished, they told me that it wasn't the first time that anything like that had happened there, because apparently they had heard voices all the time at night as well. I was kind of mortified that they didn't think to warn me before, but They said that they were sorry that this happened to me, and the mum walked me home to my house eventually. And after that, I slept with the lights on in my room for almost a month after it. And believe it or not, I did actually go back, and I did babysit those kids once again. Growing up, I had a childhood friend that lived relatively close by, and honestly, we were like two peas in a pod. We both were adventurous, believed in the paranormal, enjoyed astronomy, and generally just being outside. She was born in Alaska, and her dad lived there for quite a while, so they were always into camping, hiking, fishing, skiing, you name it. And it was with my friend's family that I got introduced to fishing, and I did a lot of camping as well. This happened during the mid to late 90s, and I would say that we were maybe around 10 to 12 years old at the time. It's been a while though, so I can't really remember exactly. One camping trip, we went to this lake in the forest that was surrounded by a meadow, and feeding the lake was a small stream leading out of the woods. We played in the meadow and the stream pretty much all day while my friend's dad fished. The lake wasn't very big, and because it had a meadow all around it, he could keep an eye on our whereabouts while he fished. While messing around the stream, the wooded area that it was coming from gave me really weird vibes though. I can't explain it, but I just felt really uneasy. Anyway, the day faded away into early evening, and it was time to leave and find a camping spot. My friend's dad packed up his fishing gear, and we all walked back to the truck on this long winding path through the woods. Once in the truck, we drove into a more remote area of the forest and made our way up this steep road that was so rough and at such an incline that I was convinced that my friend's dad was going to break his truck. He had a 4, maybe 6-cylinder Toyota pickup or something that was about as basic as a truck could get. In fact, I'm not even that sure if the truck even had 4-wheel drive. Being an Alaskan outdoorsman with years of experience, I just sort of trusted him. We finally made it up to the top though, which was flat and relatively open with a big area of forest in the opposite direction from the road that we drove up. We pitched our tent, got everything set up, and my friend and I decided to go and explore the area. We were maybe 50 yards from the tent when we heard a big crack as a tree branch snapped in the woods behind us. Well, we got quiet and looked in that direction, but we didn't see anything. Thinking that it was just a deer though, we ended up just brushing it off. But as we were walking, we heard it again, and whispered to one another about what it could be, but kept going. It stopped briefly, and when we were about maybe 200 yards from our campground, we sat on a boulder looking down the steep wooded hill overlooking the dirt road from where we had come from. And suddenly, we heard another cracking branch from behind us. Whatever it was, it actually seemed to be following us. Our imaginations going wild, we came up with everything from a serial killer stalking us in the woods to deer to Bigfoot himself, and when we got back to the campsite, we told her dad what we had heard, and how it seemed to be paralleling us. He kind of played it off as maybe a black bear and secured all the food. Later on, my friend confided in me that her dad had actually gotten out his pistol and would be sleeping with it that night. My friend and I were sharing one tent though, and he was in his own tent not far from us, so we figured everything was going to be okay. But I awoke sometime in the middle of the night hearing something or someone walking outside of our tent. As I lay still, listening, I could hear it quietly circling the tent. It sounded like it was walking on 2 legs because it had this distinct rhythm in how it walked. And whatever it was, it sounded big, as I could hear its weight, if that makes sense, as it put each foot down and walked. I could even hear relatively quiet but deep, heavy breathing at times as well. As I lay there listening, I could hear it wandering to the other parts of the campsite and then back to our tent, almost as if it was walking in a big repetitive loop. This went on for who knows how long, to be honest. It felt like an eternity, though. Terrified and unable to wake my friend, I just laid there, listening until I eventually fell back to sleep. Next morning, I told my friend and her dad about it, but I don't know if they believed me or not. Interestingly, though, Absolutely nothing in the camp was disturbed in any way. The ground wasn't very soft, and in some places it was covered in grass, so there were no footprints either. But this is something that I've just never been able to explain, and to this day it sort of lingers in the back of my mind when camping. I just always wonder what it was that walked around our tent all night. So this took place in 2001 when I was dating my ex-wife. I was at her house in a small town in Indiana and decided to stay the night because it was late. She still lived with her parents and they're old-fashioned, so I was made a bed on the couch in their living room. The couch was against the wall and positioned as such so that I could see down the hallway to my ex's bedroom. I began to drift off to sleep, and I must have woken up a little bit later and saw my ex standing outside of her bedroom, just sort of looking at me. She was wearing an old-fashioned white nightgown, which I thought was strange, but I didn't know what she wore to bed at that time. She walked down the hallway and stood next to me by the couch, but when she looked down at me, her face contorted and became sort of demonic-looking, and then she reached out and started choking me. I then woke up and sat straight up, gasping for air. I shook it off as a bad dream, and eventually I went back to sleep. But I woke up a second time to see her once again down the hallway by her door in the exact same nightgown. Once again, she came over to me, and her face turned demonic and started choking me. I again woke up, gasping for air. This time, though, I just sort of sat there for a few, mulling it over in my mind, but finally I decided that I just must be having a nightmare and that I should just probably go back to sleep. So I laid back down, and again this happened. But this time she didn't appear normal, just sort of demonic looking the whole time. And this last time that I woke up gasping for air, I ran to her room and woke her up and told her that I wasn't going back out to her living room because something was trying to kill me. She eventually calmed me down, and I went to sleep in her room. The next day I described everything to her in detail, and then she proceeds to tell me that a woman and her son used to live there but were killed in a car crash many years ago. She also tells me that her family has all seen a lady in a white nightgown and a small boy in the home. Her family is Catholic, and they actually had the place cleansed before by a priest. But I can still see that demon's face in my memories, as clear as that night. I moved in with my boyfriend over 2.5 years ago into a house that he had only lived in for a few months before I joined. Living there, it was easy to tell that there was heavy energy, especially in the basement. I've always known that there was a ghost in the house, and when strange noises began happening, it wasn't much of a surprise, really. Now, the floor plan of the house is a little strange, so please bear with me. The door to the basement is located in the downstairs bathroom. The bathroom obviously wasn't always a bathroom, and that's why it was located as a sort of shoulder room to the kitchen. I'm hoping that makes sense. We always made jokes about the ghost, but it never made moves to harm us in any way. My boyfriend would slightly disagree and bring up the time that he was going to the restroom, and the door opened on its own. Also, every now and again, usually at night, the spirit would inhabit the kitchen and make noises in there. On one occasion, just to sort of show my friends, I brought them into the basement, and they all agreed that they could feel the spirit as well. After returning back upstairs, a few of my friends claimed that they left uneasy, headache, nausea, etc., and out of anger, I confined the spirit to the basement. I practiced witchcraft. After that, though, the spirit sort of retreated, but sometime later, I insisted that the spirit leave the house, and to our surprise, it did. For months, we hadn't had any issue, and we felt no presence. But something has come into our home once again, more active than the last one as well. For the last month, noises have started again, even to the point where I swear that I think I'm hearing talking. Multiple members of the witchcraft community have agreed that the energy of the world is off, and some have even gone so far as to claim that there's been a rip in the veil. Whether you believe in that type of stuff is up to you, but I give you the information nonetheless. But this entity, whatever it is different. I don't feel its presence often, nor do I understand what it is, but one of my close friends has even witnessed what it has done before. She had come over to my house, and while I was talking, I had heard, in the downstairs bathroom, a glass jar that was sitting on the porcelain toilet move. We had stayed silent for a few moments before I turned and asked if she had heard it, and she said yes. As of the moment that I'm writing this, it's 5 a.m. and I'm laying in bed with my boyfriend in our pitch-black house. He's asleep. I was listening to music on my phone, and during a pause when there was no music playing, from all the way upstairs, I hear the doorknob of the laundry room door, located in the kitchen, turn back and forth violently. It's an unmistakable sound. I'm pretty rattled about it as well, but it's not worth waking my boyfriend up for. At least, not yet. But I worry about what this new thing is, or what it might be. Do any of you guys have any advice or any comments? Because they're welcome.